The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as Captain Sarah Chun watched her new team assemble. 7 soldiers stood in a loose formation, each one carrying the weight of failure on their shoulders. They had been labeled the rejects, the ones who couldn't cut it in their previous units. Command had given her an impossible task: turn these misfits into an elite special operations team. Sarah studied each face carefully. There was Marcus Rodriguez, a former Army Ranger who had been discharged after a training accident left him with a slight limp. His medical record showed he could still perform at 90% capacity, but the Army wanted 100% or nothing. Next to him stood Jennifer Walsh, a Navy SEAL candidate who had failed the final psychological evaluation. The report claimed she was too emotionally volatile for special operations, though her physical scores had been among the highest in her class. Behind them lurked David Kim, an Air Force pararescue specialist who had been removed from active duty after questioning a direct order that would have endangered civilian lives. His commanding officer had labeled him insubordinate, but Sarah knew there was more to the story. The quiet one in the back was Elena Vasquez, a Marine Corps sniper whose career had been derailed when she refused to take a shot that might have killed innocent bystanders. Her superiors called it hesitation under pressure, but Sarah saw it as moral courage. The remaining 3 completed this collection of military outcasts. Thomas Jackson was a former Green Beret communications specialist who had been drummed out for allegedly leaking classified information to journalists. The truth was more complex. He had tried to expose war crimes and paid the price. Ahmed Hassan was a military intelligence officer whose career ended when he challenged faulty intelligence that could have led to civilian casualties. Finally, there was Robert Stone, a demolitions expert whose precision had been questioned after one mission went wrong, despite his perfect record before that day. Sarah had volunteered for this assignment when every other officer had turned it down. The brass wanted these 7 soldiers to disappear quietly into administrative roles or civilian life. Instead, she saw potential where others saw problems. Each of these individuals had been punished for displaying the exact qualities that made great special operators: independent thinking, moral courage, and the ability to make difficult decisions under pressure. "Listen up," Sarah called out, her voice carrying across the empty training ground. "I know what you've all been told. You're here because nobody else wants you, because you've been labeled as failures, troublemakers, or worse. But I'm going to tell you something different." She walked slowly in front of the line, making eye contact with each soldier. "You're here because you have something rare in the military. You have the courage to say no when ordered to do something wrong. You have the intelligence to question bad orders. And you have the skill to succeed despite being written off by people who couldn't see your value." Marcus shifted his weight, favoring his good leg slightly. "With respect, Captain, why should we believe you? Everyone else has given up on us." Sarah stopped in front of him. "Because I've read all of your files, Rodriguez. Not just the official reports, but the real stories. I know what really happened in Afghanistan when you saved those civilians against direct orders. I know why you really got that limp, and it wasn't because you were clumsy during training." The group exchanged glances, surprise flickering across their faces. Most had assumed their real stories would never see the light of day, buried under official accounts that painted them as problems rather than heroes. "The same goes for all of you," Sarah continued. "Walsh, your emotional volatility was actually you refusing to abandon a teammate during SEAL training. Kim, your insubordination was you preventing a friendly fire incident. Vasquez, your hesitation saved 4 children who were playing near your target." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Jackson, you didn't leak classified information for money or fame. You tried to prevent a massacre. Hassan, you challenged intelligence that would have led to bombing a school. And Stone, that mission that supposedly went wrong, you prevented civilian casualties by adjusting the demolition pattern, even though it put you at greater risk." The silence stretched across the training ground. These soldiers had lived with shame and rejection for months or years, told they were failures by the very institution they had served faithfully. Now, someone was finally acknowledging what they had really done. "So here's what's going to happen," Sarah announced. We're going to train together for the next 6 months. Not to prove anything to the people who wrote you off, but to create something new, something better. You're going to become Ghost 7, and you're going to show the world what happens when principled soldiers work together without bureaucracy holding them back. Jennifer Walsh raised her hand slightly. What kind of training, Captain? Everything, Sarah replied. Urban warfare, hostage rescue, counterterrorism, humanitarian operations, deep reconnaissance. But, more importantly, we're going to train you to trust each other completely. Because in 6 months, you're going to face a mission that will prove your worth beyond any doubt. The training began immediately. Sarah had designed a program that played to each soldier's strengths while addressing their perceived weaknesses. Marcus worked with the team's medic to develop new techniques for operating with limited mobility. His limp became an asset rather than a liability as he learned to use it to appear less threatening during undercover operations. Jennifer's emotional intensity was channeled into becoming the team's psychological warfare specialist. Her ability to read people and situations, which had been labeled as instability, made her exceptionally good at predicting enemy behavior and manipulating tactical situations to the team's advantage. David's questioning nature was developed into advanced tactical analysis. He became the team member who could spot flaws in mission plans and suggest alternatives before they became deadly problems. His willingness to challenge authority was refined into the ability to provide crucial feedback during operations. Elena's moral compass guided the team's rules of engagement. Her refusal to take questionable shots evolved into an almost supernatural ability to find clean solutions to complex tactical problems. She could eliminate threats while protecting innocents in ways that seemed impossible to outside observers. Thomas used his communications expertise to develop new ways for the team to operate independently. His experience with information warfare helped him create secure networks that allowed Ghost 7 to coordinate without relying on traditional military command structures that had failed them before. Ahmed's intelligence background made him the team's strategic planner. His ability to see through false information and propaganda helped Ghost 7 avoid the intelligence failures that plagued conventional units. He could separate truth from lies in ways that saved lives and prevented mistakes. Robert's demolitions expertise expanded beyond simple destruction. He learned to use explosives as tools for rescue operations, creating precisely controlled breaches that could save hostages or clear escape routes. His attention to detail made him responsible for the team's equipment and logistics. As weeks passed, something remarkable happened. These 7 individuals, who had been written off as failures, began to work together with a precision and effectiveness that surprised even Sarah. They communicated without words, anticipated each other's needs, and covered each other's weaknesses seamlessly. The first sign of their growing capability came during a simulated hostage rescue exercise. The scenario was designed to be nearly impossible. 12 hostages held in a building with multiple armed guards, limited entry points, and civilians in the surrounding area. Previous teams had either failed to rescue all the hostages or caused significant collateral damage. Ghost 7 approached the problem differently. Instead of following standard assault protocols, they spent hours studying the building and developing an unconventional plan. Elena positioned herself to provide overwatch and intelligence, identifying guard positions and hostage locations. David analyzed the building's structure and predicted how the guards would respond to different approaches. Ahmed used his intelligence skills to gather information about the hostage takers, discovering personal details that could be exploited. Thomas established communications with the hostages inside, using improvised methods to coordinate their escape. Robert prepared precise charges that would create distractions and escape routes without endangering the hostages. Jennifer and Marcus served as the primary assault team, but their approach was subtle rather than overwhelming. They used psychological pressure and misdirection to confuse the guards while systematically isolating them from the hostages. The exercise was completed in 37 minutes with all hostages rescued, no civilian casualties, and The hostage-takers neutralized without a single shot fired. The observing officers were stunned. They had never seen anything like it. "How did you do that?" asked Colonel Patterson, the senior observer. "We've run this scenario 50 times with different teams. Nobody has ever achieved a perfect result." Sarah smiled as she watched her team perform their after-action review. "They did it because they think differently, sir. They've all been punished for refusing to accept bad solutions, so they've learned to find better ones." Word of Go-7's capabilities began to spread through the military community. Other units started requesting joint training exercises, hoping to learn from their unconventional methods. But Sarah kept the team focused on their own development rather than becoming a show for curious observers. The real test came during month 4 of training. Intelligence reports indicated that a terrorist cell was planning an attack on a medical facility in a foreign country where American civilians were working. The situation was complex. The facility was in a densely populated area, local government forces were compromised, and traditional military intervention could cause an international incident. Sarah was called to a classified briefing where senior officers laid out the problem. "We need a small team that can operate independently, neutralize the threat, and extract American personnel without causing a diplomatic crisis," explained General Morrison. "The mission requires perfect execution with zero room for error." "Go-7 can handle it," Sarah replied without hesitation. Several officers in the room exchanged skeptical glances. "Captain Chun, with all due respect, this mission requires our most experienced operators. These soldiers you're training, regardless of their recent progress, have been classified as unreliable." "Sir, I've been working with these soldiers for 4 months. I've seen what they can do when they're trusted to use their judgment and skills properly. They're exactly what this mission needs." The general studied the mission parameters again. "The window for action is very narrow. We estimate 72 hours before the attack occurs. Can your team be ready?" "They've been ready for weeks, sir." The room fell silent as the senior officers considered the implications. Using Go-7 for such a critical mission was unprecedented. If they succeeded, it would validate Sarah's unconventional training methods. If they failed, the consequences could be catastrophic both for the hostages and for the team members' futures. General Morrison made the decision. "Very well, Captain. Go-7 is authorized for the mission, but understand that this is their one chance to prove themselves. There won't be a second opportunity." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She had believed in her team from the beginning, but now their lives and the lives of others depended on that belief being correct. As she left the briefing room, Sarah realized that everything had led to this moment. 7 soldiers who had been discarded by the system were about to get their chance to show what they could really accomplish. In 72 hours, the world would know whether Go-7 was a failure or something extraordinary. The mission briefing was scheduled for 0600 hours the next morning. Sarah spent the night reviewing intelligence reports and finalizing operational plans. By dawn, she was confident that Go-7 was ready for whatever challenges awaited them. The question was whether the military establishment was ready for Go-7. The briefing room was stark and windowless, filled with the tension that came before dangerous missions. Sarah watched as Go-7 filed in, their faces serious but determined. These soldiers had spent months training together, learning to trust each other completely. Now, they would face their first real test. General Morrison stood at the front of the room, next to a large screen displaying satellite images of a medical compound in Eastern Europe. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Operation Silent Mercy. Intelligence indicates that a terrorist group called Red Dawn has infiltrated the International Medical Relief Compound in Moldavia. They're holding 17 American doctors and nurses hostage." The images showed a 3-story concrete building surrounded by smaller structures. The compound was located in a valley between 2 hills, making it difficult to approach without being detected. Civilian housing clustered around the medical facility, with narrow streets that would complicate any rescue attempt. Red Dawn is demanding the release of their leader from a European prison and safe passage out of the country, the general continued. They've threatened to execute hostages every 12 hours until their demands are met. The first deadline is in 60 hours. Ahmed Hassan leaned forward, studying the intelligence data. What do we know about Red Dawn's capabilities and numbers? Estimated 15 to 20 operatives inside the compound, replied Colonel Patterson. They're well-armed and have shown willingness to kill civilians in previous operations. The group's leader, Viktor Kozlov, is known for elaborate death traps and contingency plans. Elena Vasquez examined the satellite photos carefully. What about the surrounding area? Civilian population density. Approximately 2,000 people live within a half-mile radius of the compound, Patterson answered. Local police are cooperating, but lack the training and equipment for this type of operation. The national government has requested American assistance, but wants complete deniability. Jennifer Walsh studied the building's layout. Do we have interior intelligence? Floor plans, security systems, hostage locations? Limited, admitted Patterson. The compound was built as a hospital, so we have architectural plans from 5 years ago. However, Red Dawn has been modifying the structure for the past week. We believe they've added barricades, weapons positions, and possibly explosive devices. Thomas Jackson was already thinking about communications challenges. What about contact with the hostages? Any way to establish communication before we arrive? Negative. Red Dawn has jammed all signals in and out of the compound. They're using their own encrypted communications network, which our intelligence teams haven't been able to penetrate. Robert Stone examined the terrain around the building. Extraction routes? If we get the hostages out, how do we transport 17 people to safety without alerting the entire neighborhood? That's part of your mission planning responsibility, General Morrison replied. You'll have access to local assets, but the approach and extraction methods are up to you. We need solutions that won't create an international incident. Sarah had remained quiet during the briefing, watching her team analyze the problem from every angle. This was exactly what they had trained for, a complex situation requiring unconventional thinking and precise execution. How long do we have for mission preparation? Transport leaves in 18 hours, the general announced. You'll be inserted 12 miles from the target, and we'll need to reach the compound, conduct reconnaissance, plan the assault, and execute the rescue within the remaining 42 hours. The room fell silent as the team absorbed the timeline. 42 hours to plan and execute a hostage rescue operation that would normally require weeks of preparation. It seemed impossible, but Go-7 had learned not to accept impossible as an answer. Marcus Rodriguez spoke up, his voice steady despite the enormity of the task. We'll need specialized equipment for this mission. Medical supplies, communications gear, and tools for dealing with unknown structural modifications. Already prepared, Patterson replied, gesturing to an aide who wheeled in several equipment cases. You have access to anything in our inventory. But remember, you need to carry everything you might need. There won't be resupply once you're on the ground. David Kim was studying the mission timeline carefully. What's the weather forecast for the target area? Visibility conditions could affect our approach options. Clear skies, minimal wind, temperature around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, came the response. Moonrise is at 0230 hours, which could provide additional light, but also increase visibility to hostile forces. As the briefing concluded, Sarah gathered her team for their private mission planning session. They moved to a secure room where they could discuss their approach without outside observers. This was when Ghost-7's unique strengths would come into play. All right, Sarah began. We have a hostage rescue mission with multiple complications. Limited time, unknown enemy strength, civilian population nearby, and political sensitivity. What are your initial thoughts? Elena spread the satellite photos across the table. Standard assault protocols won't work here. The building has too many potential kill zones, and we can't risk civilian casualties. We need to draw the terrorists away from the hostages somehow. Ahmed nodded in agreement. Red Dawn's previous operations show they prefer psychological warfare over direct confrontation. Viktor Kozlov likes to create elaborate scenarios where he maintains control. We might be able to use that against him. Jennifer studied the terrorist group's psychological profile. Kozlov needs to feel superior to his enemies. If we can make him think he's outsmarting us, he might make mistakes that create opportunities. Thomas was already thinking about communications challenges. Without contact with the hostages, we're operating blind inside the building. But if I can establish a link with them before we assault, they could provide real-time intelligence on terrorist positions and movements. Robert examined the building's structure carefully. The modifications they've made probably include escape routes and weapons caches. But if they've been working for a week, they might have weakened some of the building's structural integrity. We could use that. Marcus looked at the timeline again. 12 miles to target, unknown terrain, need to avoid local populations and police patrols. We'll need to move fast, but stay invisible. David was analyzing the tactical situation from a different angle. What if we don't try to assault the building at all? What if we can get the terrorists to bring the hostages to us instead? Sarah raised an eyebrow. Explain. Every terrorist organization has contingency plans for when their primary position becomes untenable, David continued. If we can convince Red Dawn that their position is compromised, they might try to move the hostages to a secondary location. We could intercept them during the transfer. Ahmed picked up on the idea. That could work. Kozlov's psychological profile suggests he would have multiple backup plans. If we can identify his escape routes and force him to use them, we might catch him in a more vulnerable position. Elena considered the tactical implications. We need to convince him that the primary assault is coming from a different direction than where we actually plan to intercept. Create a diversion that seems like a real threat. Jennifer smiled, understanding the psychological manipulation required. Kozlov expects conventional military tactics. If we give him exactly what he expects to see, he'll react predictably. Thomas was already working out the technical details. I can create false communications traffic that suggests a large assault force is assembling. Make it look like we're planning a frontal assault with overwhelming force. Robert studied the terrain around the compound. If they try to move the hostages, they'll need vehicles. There are only 3 roads that can handle that kind of traffic while avoiding major population centers. Marcus examined the extraction routes carefully. If we can predict which route they'll use, we can prepare an ambush site that gives us maximum advantage while protecting the hostages. Sarah watched her team work through the problems systematically. This was what made Ghost 7 special. They could see solutions that others missed because they approached problems from unexpected angles. Let's develop this plan further, she decided. David, work with Ahmed to identify Red Dawn's most likely escape scenarios. Jennifer, I need you to analyze Kozlov's psychological triggers. What would convince him to abandon his primary position? She turned to the others. Elena, scout the potential ambush sites and find us the best tactical position. Thomas, start preparing the false communications that will sell our deception. Robert, figure out how to disable their vehicles without harming the hostages. Marcus, plan our infiltration route and establish medical protocols for treating hostages who may be injured or traumatized. The team dispersed to work on their individual assignments, but they remained in constant communication as the plan evolved. This was how Ghost 7 operated, as a single organism with 7 specialized parts, each contributing to the whole. Hours passed as they refined their approach. The plan that emerged was unlike anything taught in conventional military doctrine. Instead of overwhelming force, they would use misdirection and psychological manipulation. Instead of direct assault, they would create conditions that force the enemy to come to them. By late evening, they had developed a complete operational plan. Thomas would establish their false communications network, creating the impression that a full battalion was preparing to assault the compound from the north. This would be supported by visible activities designed to convince Red Dawn's lookouts that a major attack was imminent. Meanwhile, the real team would position itself along the most likely escape route to the south. Elena had identified a section of mountain road where the terrain favored the rescue team and limited the terrorists' options for counterattack or hostage execution. Ahmed's analysis of Kozlov's psychology suggested that the terrorist leader would wait until the last possible moment before abandoning his position. But Once convinced that defeat was inevitable, he would move quickly to preserve his escape options and hostage leverage. Jennifer's psychological profile indicated that Kozlov could be manipulated through his ego and his need to feel intellectually superior to his enemies. The false communications would include deliberate mistakes that made the fictional assault force seem competent but predictable. Robert had identified methods for disabling terrorist vehicles that would strand them in the kill zone without risking explosive damage to the hostages. His plan involved precision charges that would destroy engines and axles while leaving passenger compartments intact. Marcus had developed medical protocols for treating hostages who might be suffering from trauma, dehydration, or injuries inflicted by their captors. His plan included psychological first aid techniques adapted for combat situations. Sarah reviewed the complete plan one final time. It was complex, requiring perfect timing and coordination between all team members. If any element failed, the entire operation could collapse. But she had confidence in her team's abilities. "This plan has a chance," she told them. "It's unconventional, risky, and depends on us reading the enemy correctly. But it plays to our strengths and avoids our weaknesses." The team members exchanged glances, understanding that their training period was over. Tomorrow they would face their first real mission, and the stakes couldn't be higher. 17 innocent lives depended on their success, and their own futures hung in the balance. "Get some rest," Sarah ordered. "We deploy at 0400 hours. By this time tomorrow, we'll know whether Ghost 7 is ready for the challenges ahead." As the team members departed for their final night of preparation, none of them could shake the feeling that they were about to face a test that would define their careers and their lives. Everything they had trained for, everything they believed about themselves and each other, would be proven or disproven in the mountains of Moldavia. The mission that everyone expected them to fail was about to begin. The transport helicopter cut through the pre-dawn darkness as Ghost 7 approached their insertion point. Sarah checked her equipment one final time while watching her team members make their own preparations. Each soldier carried specialized gear designed for their role in the mission, but they all shared the same focused determination. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. 2 minutes to drop zone. Weather is clear. No hostile activity detected in the immediate area. Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his medical pack and checked his sidearm. His slight limp was barely noticeable now after months of adaptation training. The injury that had ended his Ranger career had become just another tool in his arsenal, making him appear less threatening during undercover operations. Jennifer Walsh reviewed the psychological profiles of Red Dawn's leadership one more time. Her tablet displayed detailed analysis of Viktor Kozlov's behavior patterns, decision-making processes, and emotional triggers. Understanding the enemy's mind was as important as understanding their weapons. David Kim studied the topographical maps of their insertion zone. 12 miles of rough mountain terrain stood between them and the medical compound where 17 Americans were being held hostage. They would need to move quickly while avoiding local patrols and civilian populations. Elena Vasquez cleaned her rifle's optics with practiced precision. As the team's primary marksman, she would be responsible for providing overwatch during their approach and covering fire during the extraction. Her moral objections to questionable shots had been refined into an almost supernatural ability to find clean solutions to complex tactical problems. Thomas Jackson activated his communications equipment and began monitoring radio frequencies in the target area. His job was to create the electronic deception that would convince Red Dawn that a massive assault was being prepared while Ghost 7 moved into position for their real operation. Ahmed Hassan reviewed intelligence reports on local terrain and population centers. His experience with information warfare made him responsible for analyzing enemy communications and predicting their likely responses to the team's psychological manipulation. Robert Stone conducted final checks on his demolitions equipment. His charges were precisely calculated to disable vehicles and create diversions without causing collateral damage. The precision that had once been questioned was now Ghost 7's greatest asset. 30 seconds, announced the pilot. Sarah stood and moved toward the helicopter's open door. Remember, we have 36 hours to reach the target, conduct reconnaissance, execute the deception, and rescue the hostages. Everything we've trained for comes down to the next day and a half. The helicopter hovered 20 feet above a rocky clearing surrounded by pine trees. Ghost 7 rappelled down in quick succession, their movements practiced and efficient. Within 90 seconds, all 7 soldiers were on the ground with their equipment, and the helicopter had disappeared into the darkness. The silence was immediate and complete. No sound of aircraft engines, no radio chatter, no urban noise. Just the whisper of wind through trees and the distant call of a night bird. They were alone in hostile territory, with 17 lives depending on their success. Sarah checked her GPS coordinates and oriented the team toward their objective. We move in single file, maintain radio silence unless there's immediate danger. David takes point. Elena brings up the rear with overwatch responsibility. They began their approach through the mountain forest, moving like shadows between the trees. David's navigation skills guided them along paths that avoided roads, villages, and known patrol routes. Elena's position at the rear allowed her to watch for pursuit while providing early warning if they encountered unexpected obstacles. The terrain was more challenging than the satellite photos had indicated. Steep ravines cut across their planned route, forcing them to find alternate paths that added time to their movement. Rocky outcroppings provided concealment, but slowed their progress as they navigated around impassable sections. After 4 hours of careful movement, they reached an observation position overlooking the medical compound. The building was exactly as described in the intelligence briefing, but the modifications made by Red Dawn were more extensive than expected. Ahmed studied the compound through high-powered optics while Elena provided security. They've added steel plates to the windows on the ground floor and created firing positions on the roof. I count at least 6 guards visible, but there are probably more inside. Thomas activated his electronic surveillance equipment and began monitoring Red Dawn's communications. They're using encrypted radios, but I could track their transmission patterns. Looks like guard rotations every 4 hours with overlapping coverage zones. Jennifer watched the guards' behavior patterns, analyzing their alertness levels and potential psychological vulnerabilities. They're confident but not complacent. Professional discipline, but they're not expecting immediate attack. Kozlov has them focused on perimeter defense rather than hostage security. Robert examined the compound's structural modifications with an engineer's eye. The steel plating is welded in place, but the welding job is amateur quality. The roof positions are improvised rather than professionally constructed. They've created strong points, but also potential weak points. Marcus studied the medical aspects of the situation. 17 hostages held for 5 days. They'll be suffering from stress, dehydration, and possibly injuries from the initial takeover. We need to plan for medical treatment during and after extraction. David analyzed the tactical situation from multiple angles. The compound is well defended against direct assault, but their defensive improvements have also created blind spots. If we can force them to abandon this position, they'll be vulnerable during movement. Sarah synthesized her team's observations into an operational assessment. Red Dawn has turned the medical compound into a fortress, but they've also trapped themselves inside. If we can convince them that staying is more dangerous than leaving, they'll move the hostages to a location where we have tactical advantage. They spent the next 6 hours conducting detailed reconnaissance of the compound and surrounding area. Elena mapped guard positions and patrol routes while Thomas intercepted and analyzed enemy communications. Ahmed identified Red Dawn's command structure and decision-making patterns. Jennifer studied Kozlov's behavior through long-range surveillance, noting his interactions with subordinates and his reactions to various stimuli. The terrorist leader was paranoid but intelligent, constantly checking security measures and adjusting defensive positions. Robert surveyed potential ambush sites along the 3 roads leading away from the compound. His engineering background helped him identify locations where natural terrain features could be enhanced to create tactical advantages for the rescue team. Marcus developed detailed profiles of each visible hostage, noting their apparent physical and psychological condition. Several showed signs of injury or illness that would require immediate medical attention during extraction. As evening approached, Sarah made the decision to implement their deception plan. Thomas, begin Phase 1 of the electronic warfare operation. Make it look like a battalion-sized force is assembling 12 kilometers north of the compound. Thomas activated his sophisticated communications equipment and began broadcasting false radio traffic that suggested a large military force was preparing for assault. His transmissions included realistic-sounding coordination messages, equipment checks, and operational planning discussions that would convince any intercepting intelligence that a major attack was imminent. The effect on Red Dawn was almost immediate. Ahmed surveillance detected increased radio traffic as the terrorists began reporting the apparent military buildup to their leadership. Guard rotations became more frequent, and additional security measures were implemented. Kozlov is taking the bait, Jennifer reported after observing the terrorist leader's reactions. He's focused entirely on the apparent threat from the north. His stress levels are increasing, and he's starting to consider contingency options. Elena had repositioned herself to observe the compound's southern approaches, watching for signs that Red Dawn might be preparing to move the hostages. No movement yet, but they're bringing vehicles closer to the building. Looks like they're preparing for possible evacuation. Over the next 12 hours, Thomas gradually escalated the electronic deception. His false communications suggested that the fictional assault force was growing larger and more sophisticated. Realistic-sounding radio chatter described heavy weapons, air support, and special operations elements converging on the compound. Ahmed monitored Red Dawn's intercepted communications as the terrorist leadership debated their options. Kozlov is arguing with his subordinates about whether to stand and fight or implement their escape plan. His tactical advisor is recommending immediate evacuation, but Kozlov wants to maintain control of the hostages. Jennifer's psychological analysis predicted that Kozlov would eventually choose evacuation over siege warfare. His ego requires him to feel superior to his enemies, but his survival instinct is stronger. When he becomes convinced that staying means certain death or capture, he'll choose to preserve his options by moving to a fallback position. Robert had spent the night preparing the ambush site along the most likely escape route. His precisely placed charges would disable terrorist vehicles without harming hostages, while natural terrain features would channel the enemy into a kill zone where Ghost 7 could control the engagement. Marcus positioned himself with medical supplies and equipment near the planned ambush site. His role would be crucial once the hostages were freed, as several would require immediate medical attention before they could be moved to safety. David and Sarah took positions that would allow them to coordinate the entire operation while providing tactical flexibility if the situation developed differently than expected. Their role was to adapt the plan in real time as circumstances changed. As dawn approached on the second day, the pressure of Thomas's electronic deception finally overcame Kozlov's resistance to evacuation. Red Dawn's intercepted communications confirmed that the terrorist leader had ordered immediate withdrawal to a secondary position in the mountains. Movement in the compound, Elena reported. They're loading hostages into 3 vehicles. Looks like the entire force is preparing to evacuate. Ahmed confirmed the intelligence through intercepted radio traffic. Kozlov has ordered complete withdrawal. They're taking all hostages and abandoning the compound. Estimated time of departure is 30 minutes. Sarah felt the familiar calm that came before action. All of Ghost 7's training and preparation had led to this moment. 17 lives hung in the balance, and the success or failure of their mission would determine whether they were truly the elite team she believed them to be. All positions, this is Ghost 7 actual, Sarah transmitted to her team. Target is moving. Execute Phase 2 of the operation. Remember, the hostages are our priority. We bring them home safely, no matter what it costs. The convoy of 3 vehicles emerged from the medical compound exactly as Ghost 7 had predicted. Kozlov had chosen the Southern Mountain route, driving directly toward the ambush site that Robert had spent hours preparing. The terrorists believed they were escaping to safety, but they were actually moving into the most dangerous situation of their lives. Ghost 7 was about to prove that sometimes the biggest failures could become the greatest successes if they were given the chance to show what they could really accomplish. The 3-vehicle convoy wound through the mountain road exactly as Ghost 7 had predicted. Sarah watched through her scope as the lead vehicle approached the ambush zone, her heart steady despite the enormous stakes. 17 American hostages were about to be freed or lost forever, depending on how well her team executed their plan. Elena Vasquez had positioned herself on a rocky outcropping that provided perfect overwatch of the entire ambush site. Through her rifle scope, she could see the terrorists' faces clearly. Viktor Kozlov sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, constantly checking his surroundings for signs of pursuit. His paranoia had led him directly into Ghost 7's trap. Robert Stone crouched behind a boulder with his finger on the detonator for the charges he had placed throughout the kill zone. His explosives were precisely positioned to disable the vehicles without harming the hostages who were seated in the rear compartments. Years of precision training had prepared him for this moment of perfect timing. Thomas Jackson monitored enemy communications from his concealed position, ready to jam their radios if they tried to call for reinforcement or coordinate a counterattack. His electronic warfare equipment also provided real-time intelligence on the convoy's internal communications and tactical intentions. Marcus Rodriguez waited in a protected position with medical equipment and supplies, prepared to treat injured hostages as soon as they were freed. His medical training had been enhanced by months of preparation for trauma care in combat conditions. Ahmed Hassan tracked the convoy's approach while analyzing Red Dawn's tactical responses to the changing situation. His intelligence background allowed him to predict how the terrorists would react when their escape route was suddenly cut off. David Kim had positioned himself to provide tactical coordination and adapt the plan if unexpected complications arose. His ability to think through complex problems under pressure made him responsible for real-time decision-making during the operation. Jennifer Walsh studied the terrorists' psychological state through long-range observation, looking for signs of panic or desperation that could endanger the hostages. Her analysis would determine when and how Ghost 7 initiated their assault to minimize risk to the Americans. Lead vehicle is approaching the primary detonation point, Elena reported through her throat microphone. I have clear shots on the driver and passenger, but Kozlov appears to be holding a remote device that could be a dead man switch. Sarah processed this new intelligence quickly. A dead man switch would detonate explosives if Kozlov was killed or incapacitated, potentially murdering all 17 hostages. This was exactly the kind of contingency that made Kozlov dangerous. He always had backup plans for his backup plans. Jennifer, psychological assessment, Sarah requested. Will Kozlov trigger the device if he believes he's trapped? Jennifer studied the terrorist leader's body language and behavior patterns. Negative. His psychological profile shows he needs to feel superior and in control. He'll try to negotiate or threaten rather than commit suicide. The device is leverage, not a suicide weapon. Ahmed confirmed this assessment through intercepted communications. Radio traffic indicates Kozlov is ordering his men to prepare for hostage negotiations. He's not planning to detonate anything. He wants to trade the Americans for safe passage. Robert adjusted his demolition plan based on this new information. I can disable the vehicles without triggering panic responses, but we need to neutralize Kozlov's device before he realizes the situation is hopeless. Elena shifted her aim to study the terrorist leader more carefully. The device appears to be a standard remote detonator with a range limitation. If I can eliminate it without alerting him, we remove his primary leverage. Thomas had been monitoring Red Dawn's tactical communications and discovered crucial intelligence. They've lost contact with their support elements. Kozlov thinks he's moving to a safe house, but his backup team was arrested by local authorities 6 hours ago. He doesn't know he's completely isolated. Sarah recognized the opportunity this created. That's our tactical advantage. Kozlov expects reinforcement that isn't coming. When he realizes he's alone, his psychological profile suggests he'll become desperate, but also more willing to negotiate. The lead vehicle entered the kill zone exactly where Robert's charges would be most effective. Sarah watched through her scope as the convoy slowed to navigate a particularly narrow section of road. This was the moment they had trained for, when the enemy was most vulnerable and the hostages could be protected. "Execute," Sarah commanded. Roberts precisely placed charges detonated in perfect sequence, disabling all 3 vehicles without causing injury to anyone inside. The explosions were calculated to destroy engines and axles while leaving passenger compartments intact. The convoy was instantly immobilized exactly where Ghost 7 wanted them. Elena's rifle spoke once, and Kozlov's remote detonator shattered in his hand before he could trigger whatever explosives he had prepared. Her shot was so precise that the terrorist leader wasn't even injured by the device's destruction, but his primary leverage over the hostages was eliminated. Thomas immediately jammed all radio frequencies in the area, preventing the terrorists from calling for help or coordinating their response to the ambush. Red Dawn was suddenly cut off from all external communication and trapped in a location where they had no tactical advantages. David coordinated the next phase of the assault as Ghost 7 moved to secure the disabled vehicles. Jennifer, initiate psychological pressure. Ahmed, begin intelligence exploitation. Everyone else, standard hostage extraction protocol. Jennifer activated a powerful speaker system and began broadcasting psychological warfare messages designed to convince the terrorists that resistance was hopeless. Her voice, amplified and distorted, seemed to come from everywhere at once as she described the overwhelming force that surrounded them. "Victor Kozlov, you are completely surrounded by elite American special forces," she announced in perfect Russian. "Your escape route is blocked, your communications are jammed, and your support team has been eliminated. Your only option is immediate surrender of all hostages." The effect on the terrorists was immediate and dramatic. Without their leader's remote detonator and cut off from all communication, they found themselves trapped in disabled vehicles with no idea how many enemies surrounded them or what weapons were aimed at them. Marcus moved forward with medical supplies as Elena provided overwatch for his approach to the hostages. Several of the Americans were injured, and all showed signs of exhaustion and dehydration from their 5-day captivity. His priority was stabilizing anyone with serious injuries before beginning the extraction. Ahmed used specialized equipment to exploit Red Dawn's abandoned communications gear, gathering intelligence about their organization, funding sources, and planned future operations. This information would be invaluable for preventing other terrorist attacks. Robert secured the disabled vehicles and searched for explosive devices that might threaten the hostages or the rescue team. His expertise allowed him to quickly identify and neutralize several booby traps that Kozlov had prepared as final contingencies. Thomas established secure communications with command headquarters and began coordinating the extraction of hostages and captured terrorists. His technical skills ensured that Ghost 7 could maintain operational security while arranging for support elements. Sarah moved forward to personally confirm that all hostages were accounted for and safe. 17 American medical workers had been successfully freed without casualties, and all 14 Red Dawn terrorists were captured alive for intelligence exploitation. The hostages' condition was better than expected, though several required immediate medical attention. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the compound's chief physician, had used her medical knowledge to keep her colleagues healthy despite their captivity. Her leadership had prevented several deaths during the most dangerous moments of their imprisonment. "How did you find us so quickly?" Dr. Mitchell asked as Marcus treated her dehydrated colleagues. The terrorists said American forces wouldn't be able to locate them for weeks. Sarah smiled as she helped evacuate the rescued hostages. We had some advantages that Red Dawn didn't expect. Sometimes the best solutions come from people who think differently than everyone else. The extraction proceeded flawlessly as local allies arrived to transport the freed Americans to medical facilities and the captured terrorists to detention centers. Ghost 7 had accomplished what many considered impossible: a perfect hostage rescue with no casualties and complete intelligence exploitation. General Morrison's voice came through Sarah's secure communicator as the operation concluded. Outstanding work, Captain Chun. Ghost 7 has exceeded all expectations. The hostages are safe, the terrorists are captured, and we've gathered enough intelligence to prevent several planned attacks. But the real validation came from the hostages themselves. As Dr. Mitchell was helped into the evacuation helicopter, she turned back to Sarah with tears in her eyes. Thank you for not giving up on us. We heard the terrorists talking about how no one would risk a rescue attempt because it was too dangerous. Elena, still providing overwatch from her elevated position, spoke into her radio. No one gets left behind. That's what Ghost 7 means. The helicopter lifted off into the morning sky, carrying 17 Americans who had been written off as lost causes by many analysts. They were alive because 7 soldiers who had also been written off as lost causes had refused to accept that some people couldn't be saved. As Ghost 7 prepared for their own extraction, Sarah looked around at her team members. Marcus was documenting medical lessons learned from the operation. Jennifer was analyzing the psychological techniques that had proven most effective against Red Dawn. David was conducting an after-action review of their tactical procedures. Ahmed was securing intelligence materials for analysis by specialist teams. Thomas was ensuring that all communications equipment was recovered or destroyed to protect operational security. Robert was photographing the demolition results to refine his techniques for future missions. Elena had moved to a new overwatch position to provide security during the extraction, her rifle ready to protect her teammates as they completed their mission documentation. These 7 soldiers had been labeled as failures by the same military establishment that was now praising their success. They had been told they were unsuitable for special operations, but they had just completed one of the most successful hostage rescue operations in recent history. Sarah realized that Ghost 7's greatest achievement wasn't the mission itself, but proving that the military's definition of failure needed to be reconsidered. Sometimes the soldiers who questioned orders, who refused to accept bad solutions, who prioritized moral courage over blind obedience, were exactly what was needed when conventional approaches failed. The extraction helicopter appeared on the horizon, coming to collect the team that everyone had thought would never amount to anything. As they prepared to return to base, Sarah knew that Ghost 7's story was just beginning. They had proven themselves in combat, but their real test would be convincing the military establishment to change how it evaluated and utilized soldiers who didn't fit traditional molds. The mission was over, but the revolution was just getting started. The Pentagon briefing room was packed with senior military officials, intelligence analysts, and government administrators. Word of Ghost 7's successful hostage rescue had spread rapidly through military channels, and everyone wanted to understand how 7 soldiers labeled as failures had accomplished what seasoned special operations units might have struggled to achieve. General Morrison stood at the front of the room, displaying mission footage and operational statistics on large screens. The numbers were undeniable. 17 hostages rescued alive, 14 terrorists captured without casualties, significant intelligence materials recovered, 0 civilian casualties, and complete operational security maintained throughout. Ladies and gentlemen, the general began. Operation Silent Mercy represents a new paradigm in special operations methodology. Ghost 7 demonstrated that unconventional thinking, when properly channeled and supported, can achieve results that surpass traditional approaches. In the back of the room, Sarah Chun watched as her team's achievements were presented to the military leadership that had originally written them off. Marcus Rodriguez sat beside her, his slight limp no longer seen as a disability, but as evidence of sacrifice and adaptation. Jennifer Walsh reviewed psychological analysis reports that validated her approaches to enemy manipulation. David Kim studied the tactical breakdown of their operation, noting how their question-everything methodology had identified solutions that conventional planning might have missed. Elena Vasquez cleaned her rifle with the same precision that had eliminated Kozlov's detonator from 300 meters away. Thomas Jackson monitored communications traffic as news of Go-7's success spread through military networks worldwide. Ahmed Hassan analyzed intelligence reports showing how their captured materials had already prevented 2 planned terrorist attacks. Robert Stone calculated the precise engineering specifications that had made their vehicle disabling techniques so effective. Colonel Patterson, who had initially been skeptical of using Go-7 for such a critical mission, stood to address the assembled officers. The conventional wisdom suggested that soldiers who had been removed from their previous units for disciplinary or medical reasons could not be trusted with high-stakes operations. Go-7 has proven that assumption completely wrong. He gestured toward the operational timeline displayed on screen. Every aspect of this mission required thinking outside established doctrine. The psychological manipulation, the electronic deception, the precision demolitions, the medical protocols, none of these approaches are taught in standard special operations training. A rear admiral from Naval Special Warfare raised his hand. General Morrison, what specific factors contributed to Go-7's success? Were there unconventional methods, simply luck, or is this approach replicable with other personnel? Sarah stood to answer the question directly. Sir, Go-7 succeeded because these soldiers had already proven their willingness to challenge bad orders and find better solutions. Their previous failures were actually evidence of independent thinking and moral courage under pressure. She moved to the front of the room, feeling the weight of skeptical gazes from officers who still weren't convinced that misfits could outperform elite units. Marcus Rodriguez was labeled disabled because he sustained an injury while saving civilian lives against direct orders. That same moral courage and tactical adaptability made him invaluable during hostage medical care. Sarah continued down the line. Jennifer Walsh was dismissed as emotionally unstable because she refused to abandon a teammate during training. That loyalty and emotional intelligence allowed her to manipulate our enemy's psychology with surgical precision. The room listened intently as she described each team member's transformation from perceived liability to tactical asset. David Kim was called insubordinate for preventing friendly fire incidents. That willingness to question authority helped him identify flaws in conventional assault planning that could have gotten hostages killed. She turned to Elena Vasquez. Elena was accused of hesitation under pressure because she refused to take shots that might harm innocent civilians. That moral precision translated into the ability to eliminate specific threats without causing collateral damage. Sarah gestured toward Thomas Jackson. Thomas was labeled as a security risk for exposing war crimes to journalists. That commitment to truth and justice made him the perfect choice for psychological warfare operations where credibility and moral authority mattered. Ahmed Hassan nodded as Sarah described his contribution. Ahmed challenged faulty intelligence that could have led to civilian casualties. That analytical rigor helped us understand enemy psychology and predict their responses with perfect accuracy. Finally, she indicated Robert Stone. Robert's precision was questioned after one mission with complications beyond his control. That same attention to detail allowed him to disable terrorist vehicles without harming the hostages they contained. A Marine Corps general leaned forward. Captain Shun, you're suggesting that soldiers who violate military discipline actually make better special operators. That's contrary to everything we know about unit cohesion and command authority. David Kim stood to respond. Sir, with respect, we didn't violate military discipline. We violated specific orders that would have caused unnecessary casualties or compromised mission objectives. There's a difference between insubordination and moral courage. Jennifer Walsh added her perspective. Military discipline should support mission success and protect innocent lives. When orders conflict with those goals, following them blindly becomes the real failure. Marcus Rodriguez addressed the medical aspects of their success. Traditional special operations doctrine would have excluded me because of my physical limitation. But Go 7 proved that diversity of capabilities creates tactical advantages that uniform perfection cannot match. Elena Vasquez spoke quietly but with absolute conviction. Every shot I didn't take in my previous career taught me something about precision and restraint. Those lessons saved 17 lives in Moldavia. Thomas Jackson demonstrated his technical expertise by showing how their communications deception had been more effective than conventional electronic warfare. Standard military thinking follows predictable patterns that enemies can anticipate. Our approach succeeded because we thought like criminals instead of soldiers. Ahmed Hassan presented intelligence analysis showing how their captured materials were yielding ongoing operational benefits. Red Dawn's network is being systematically dismantled because we approach the intelligence exploitation differently than traditional methods would suggest. Robert Stone displayed engineering calculations proving that his vehicle disabling technique was more precise and safer than standard demolitions doctrine. Military engineering focuses on destruction. Ghost 7 engineering focused on surgical precision that protected lives while achieving objectives. The briefing room fell silent as the assembled officers absorbed what they had heard. These 7 soldiers were not arguing for the abandonment of military discipline, but for a more sophisticated understanding of when and how to apply it. General Morrison resumed his presentation, displaying psychological profiles and performance metrics that quantified Go 7's effectiveness. Intelligence analysis suggests that soldiers who demonstrate moral courage under pressure, even when it conflicts with direct orders, possess exactly the decision-making capabilities required for independent special operations. He turned to address the broader implications. We have identified approximately 200 personnel throughout all branches who have been removed from elite units for reasons similar to those that affected Go 7's members. If Captain Chin's approach can be replicated, we could create multiple teams with similar capabilities. A Defense Department official raised concerns about the precedent being set. General, if we validate insubordination by rewarding these soldiers with special assignments, what message does that send to the rest of the military? Sarah stepped forward to address this critical point. Sir, we're not validating insubordination. We're recognizing that the most complex missions require soldiers capable of independent moral and tactical judgment. These operations cannot be micromanaged from headquarters. They require personnel who can think critically under pressure. Ahmed Hassan provided supporting analysis. Intelligence studies show that special operations failures most often result from rigid adherence to plans that become obsolete when situations change. The ability to adapt requires exactly the kind of independent thinking that Ghost 7 demonstrated. Elena Vasquez offered a marksman's perspective. In precision shooting, you have to know when not to take the shot. In special operations, you have to know when not to follow the order. Both require the same kind of moral and tactical judgment. The discussion continued for hours as military leadership grappled with the implications of Ghost 7's success. Traditional military thinking emphasized obedience and conformity, but the changing nature of warfare increasingly required adaptability and independent judgment. As the briefing concluded, General Morrison announced a decision that would change how the military approached special operations recruitment and training. Effective immediately, we are establishing the GHOST program to identify and develop soldiers who demonstrate exceptional moral courage and independent thinking capabilities. He turned to Sarah Chun. Captain, you will oversee the expansion of this program. Your mission is to identify personnel who have been written off by conventional evaluation methods, but who possess the qualities that made Ghost 7 successful. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, but also the excitement of opportunity. Sir, I request permission to work directly with the soldiers who have been dismissed from elite units for moral courage rather than incompetence. They're exactly the personnel we need for the most challenging missions. The general nodded. Granted, you have full authority to recruit from any branch of service and access to whatever resources you need. The Ghost program is now our highest priority special operations initiative. As the briefing room emptied, the 7 members of the original Ghost team remained behind with Sarah. They had proven that failure could become success when the right conditions were created. Now, they had the opportunity to help other soldiers make the same transformation. Marcus Rodriguez looked around at his teammates. 6 months ago, we were all considered washouts. Now we're being asked to create a new kind of military unit. Jennifer Walsh smiled. The best part is that we get to prove that thinking differently isn't a weakness. It's exactly what the military needs to handle impossible missions. David Kim was already considering the broader implications. We've shown that questioning orders can lead to better outcomes. Now we need to teach that lesson to an institution that's built on following orders without question. Elena Vasquez spoke with quiet confidence. Every soldier we recruit into this program is someone who chose to do the right thing, even when it cost them their career. Those are exactly the people we want watching our backs. Thomas Jackson was thinking about the technical challenges ahead. We'll need to develop new training methods, new evaluation criteria, and new mission planning approaches. Everything about Ghost program has to be different from conventional special operations. Ahmed Hassan understood the strategic implications. We're not just creating new teams, we're changing how the military thinks about leadership, discipline, and moral courage under pressure. Robert Stone, ever practical, focused on immediate needs. We'll need facilities, equipment, and administrative support. But most importantly, we'll need to identify soldiers who have the right combination of skills and moral character. Sarah looked around at the team that had started as 7 failures and had become the foundation for a revolutionary approach to special operations. We've proven that everyone was wrong about us. Now we get to prove they were wrong about a lot of other soldiers too. As Ghost 7 walked out of the Pentagon together, they carried with them the knowledge that they had fundamentally changed how the military would approach its most difficult challenges. Their success had opened doors for hundreds of other soldiers who had been written off by a system that didn't understand their true value. The soldiers everyone thought were failures had just created a new definition of success that would reshape special operations for generations to come. Ghost 7 had become something much more than an elite team. They had become proof that sometimes the best way to serve your country is to refuse to follow orders that don't make sense. The program that started with 7 misfits was about to become the military's most important special operations capability. And it all began with people who were brave enough to fail at the wrong things so they could succeed at what really mattered.